Waki Gatame is such a dangerous arm lock technique, often found in like self-defense curriculums, that it's so dangerous that it's usually banned in judo. Um, and it's, to my knowledge, it's not that it's banned in other forms of competition, but not a lot of people really train it unless they come from one of these backgrounds where they train traditional self-defense stuff. But it's not because it's not brutal or efficient, or um, it's not that it can't result in efficient competition movement. It can, but man, is it dangerous. To really get the mechanic of the throw to work, you got to have a little bit of violence in it, and it might be one of the reasons why we don't really see it in casual play or competition so much, because it is really explicitly a self-defense move, and it's taught in a lot of army combatives. And when you look at this old footage of like old professional wrestling, anytime between World War One era and World War Two era, there was a lot of Japanese jiu-jitsu and then later like judo that explicitly made its way into army combatives curriculums, both here and in Britain and a little bit in France, right? So it's not, for me, it's not a coincidence to see this kind of stuff. Um, I have my own little pet theory that a lot, when you have this professional wrestling format at this moment in history, when it's coming out of a time when people were doing legitimate catch wrestling stuff where they would do shoots and hooks, right? But they would, you know, the further and further down in history, it got particularly around the time when they were able to run cameras on it, whether it's a film camera or a TV camera. Um, there was the same rate that that expanded is the same rate that things got colorful and ridiculous and less realistic, right? But also, like right around the middle point of that era is when a lot of people were coming back from these wars and when they would have learned a lot of these techniques in army combatives courses or other branches of the military. So to me, my pet theory um, is that a lot of that stuff made its way into professional wrestling specifically from that source. Because the way that professional wrestling works, and you can even see this today, whenever there's a large body of technique or whatever else that makes its rounds as something that people can recognize as a painful hold, it will get absorbed into professional wrestling. So, what do I mean by that? In the era of UFC, MMA, all of a sudden, the more people became popularly conscious of things like, a straight armbar, Fujiwara Armbar, or rear naked choke, or all these things, when it's not done as like a very flashy quote unquote sleeper hold, right? If a submission hold was done in the UFC and if people were tapping out to it, then eventually people in professional wrestling leagues would incorporate that into the show, right? And that's the way this stuff works. So these entertainers, they're usually just trying to put in whatever spice they can into the gumbo. So if they find a technique that works in this situation, they'll put it in for color. And getting exposed to these techniques in an army combative curriculum, like for any of the vets, that would not have been any less of a valid source for these techniques. So there's always this kind of like interchange between Western wrestling and Eastern jujutsu and jiu-jitsu based arts, and this cross pollination. And that's one of the many points of cross pollination that ended up, in my opinion, serving more of a direct role when so many everyday people who enlisted were becoming exposed to these techniques. So that's a little pet theory I might expand on later, but just to bring it back to the specific technique, Waki Gatame is one of the moves that would show up in some of those curriculums, and that's one of the reasons why I think it shows up here. And right around this time in wrestling, it shows up in a lot of people's arsenal. So I don't think that's a coincidence.